Commander Jack Renshaw was no stranger to danger. As a veteran of countless space missions, he had seen his fair share of alien planets, hostile environments, and life-or-death situations. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened when his ship, the Endeavour, was caught in a strange cosmic storm while exploring uncharted space. The ship was tossed and turned in the storm's violent currents, spinning out of control, and Jack fought to keep his ship on course. It was a losing battle. The ship's hull cracked under the immense pressure, systems failed, and Jack's communications went silent. With a violent jolt, the ship tore through the atmosphere of an unknown planet. Before he could make sense of what was happening, everything went black. When Jack finally regained consciousness, he was on the ground, surrounded by the remnants of his ship. The Endeavour was a twisted heap of metal and wires, half buried in a thick jungle. His head throbbed, and his body ached, but he was alive. For a moment, Jack simply lay there, gathering his bearings. He had no idea where he was or how far from Earth he had traveled. The sky was a dull purple, and the air was thick with humidity. Massive trees towered overhead, their trunks twisted in strange shapes. The ground was soft, and thick alien grass poked out around him. He tried to stand but staggered and fell to his knees. His left leg was bruised, and his right arm felt like it was broken. But Jack wasn't one to give up easily. He forced himself back to his feet and started to survey the area. His first instinct was survival. The jungle was alive with sounds, chirps, growls, and hissing noises that sent shivers down his spine. He knew better than to stand still for too long. Whatever creatures lived here were probably just as curious about him as he was about them. Jack limped toward the wreckage of his ship. He needed to assess the damage and figure out a way to send a distress signal. His ship's radio was down, but maybe he could salvage some parts. After what felt like hours of scrounging, Jack managed to find the emergency beacon. But there was a problem. The device was broken beyond repair. Frustration rose in his chest. He was stranded, and without a way to contact his people, there was no telling how long it would take for anyone to find him. He wasn't sure if anyone would even come looking. Nightfall came quickly, and Jack knew he had to find shelter. The jungle became even more menacing after dark. The strange noises seemed closer now, and he was sure something was watching him. He didn't know if it was a wild animal or something far worse, but instinct told him not to stay in the open. Using his survival training, Jack managed to build a small shelter from fallen branches and leaves. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he lay there, trying to get some sleep, his mind raced. Where was he? Was this planet part of an unexplored system? Was he even still in the same galaxy? Hours passed, and the jungle seemed to grow quieter. Jack finally drifted into a restless sleep. The next day, he awoke to something far more terrifying. Movement. Jack's eyes shot open. He quickly crawled to the edge of his shelter and peered through the leaves. Through the dense jungle, he saw figures moving. Tall, humanoid figures with strange, glowing markings on their skin. They were fast, and their movements were so fluid it was as if they were part of the jungle itself. They were alien women, unlike anything Jack had ever seen. Their faces were sharp, their eyes glowed a piercing green, and their bodies were adorned with primitive weapons. They were watching him, but not approaching. Jack instinctively reached for his blaster, but the weapon was nowhere to be found. His heart pounded in his chest. The aliens were too close. He couldn't fight them without proper gear, but he also couldn't stay hidden forever. Slowly, cautiously, he backed away from his shelter, trying to stay out of sight. But it was too late. With a blur of motion, one of the alien women leaped toward him. Jack barely had time to react before she grabbed him by the arm and pulled him to his feet. Her strength was terrifying, and her grip felt like iron. She didn't speak, but her eyes told him everything he needed to know. He was their prisoner. The others approached, surrounding him. Jack felt his pulse quicken. He didn't know what they wanted, but he knew he had to play along. Fight now. and he would die. The alien women exchanged sharp, quick words in their language. Jack didn't understand, but it didn't matter. He could see the way they studied him, their curiosity mixed with something darker. They weren't interested in killing him right away. They wanted something from him, and Jack had no idea what that might be. Jack was roughly pulled through the dense jungle by the alien women. Their grip on him was unyielding, and the more he struggled, the tighter their hold seemed to get. The jungle, with its twisted trees and thick undergrowth, was strange and unfamiliar. Yet, as they moved through it, the women appeared to know exactly where they were going. It was as if the jungle itself was their ally. They didn't speak much, their language quick and harsh, though Jack could sense their eyes on him at all times. His mind raced. Where were they taking him? What did they want? He had no answers, only the feeling that his survival depended on understanding them, and fast. The jungle grew quieter the further they went, the strange sounds of the night replaced by the hum of an ancient rhythm in the air. It wasn't long before Jack saw what they had been heading toward, a massive settlement carved into the trees. It was an impressive sight. Towering wooden structures built high up in the canopy, connected by rope bridges and walkways. The whole place looked like something out of an ancient storybook, but with a fierceness that was undeniable. As they approached, more women appeared from the shadows. Their faces were hard, their eyes sharp, and they all seemed to be watching him with intense curiosity. Jack felt like an animal on display in some kind of alien zoo. They whispered among themselves, their language unfamiliar but filled with an energy that seemed almost dangerous. They finally arrived at the heart of the village, where a large open area awaited. In the center stood an impressive woman, taller than the others, her presence commanding and intense. She wore intricate armor made from animal skins and strange metal, and a long braided necklace of teeth and bones hung around her neck. Her eyes were a vivid green, brighter than the others, and she seemed to study Jack as though she were trying to figure out if he was worth the trouble. The women stopped before her. The leader's sharp eyes scanned Jack from head to toe before she spoke. Her voice was deep, and though he didn't understand the words, Jack could tell she was the one in charge. The women holding him shoved him to the ground in front of the leader. Jack winced as his knee hit the rough ground, but he quickly forced himself to stand, not willing to show weakness. He faced the leader, trying to maintain a steady posture despite the uncertainty coursing through him. "Who are you?" the leader asked suddenly, in perfect, though slightly accented, English. Her voice was strong, commanding, yet curious. Jack blinked in surprise. I'm Commander Jack Renshaw," he replied, trying to hide the confusion in his voice. "I come from Earth." The leader tilted her head slightly, as if the word Earth meant nothing to her. "Earth." She repeated the word slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You are not one of us." "No," Jack said. "I'm not." The leader stared at him for a long moment before speaking again. "Why are you here?" Jack knew the truth was too dangerous to tell them. He couldn't reveal that he was stranded on their planet, completely out of his element. But he also knew that being honest could be his best chance for survival. He chose his words carefully. "I crashed," he said. "My ship, it's broken. I don't know where I am or how to get home." There was a pause, and Jack couldn't help but notice how the leader seemed to consider his words with great seriousness. Finally, she spoke. "You are far from home," she said. "This is the land of the Xilari. We are the warriors of this world. You are not one of us, and yet you have survived." Jack raised an eyebrow. He had no idea what Xilari was, but it sounded like the name of a people who lived on this strange planet. "Why are you telling me this?" Jack asked, still confused. The leader's eyes glinted. "Because you will serve us. You will either fight for us, or we will let the jungle take you. It is the way of the Xilari." Jack's heart raced. He had no choice. If he didn't agree, he was likely dead. The jungle seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and he could sense the danger that lurked in every shadow. But to fight for these women, He had to admit, it seemed like his best option. I'll help, he said, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. Just tell me what you need. The leader studied him, and for a moment, Jack thought she might deny his offer. But then, a small smile tugged at her lips, and she nodded. You will fight. You will prove yourself worthy of the HFY. You will serve the tribe, or you will die. The other women around them murmured in agreement. Jack's thoughts swirled as he stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what he had just signed up for. But one thing was certain, his journey had taken a sharp turn, and the fight for survival had just begun. The next few days were filled with hard lessons for Jack. The HFY had made it clear that he would either fight for them or be left to the dangers of the jungle. There was no middle ground. The leader, the woman who called herself Matriarch HFY, had spoken of honor and strength. To her, the world was a place where only the strong survived, and Jack would need to prove himself if he was to earn his place among them. At first, Jack struggled. The HFY had no interest in pampering him, and their methods were harsh. They did not show mercy. Their training was brutal, and the physical challenges were exhausting. Every day, Jack faced tasks that pushed him beyond his limits. He was taught how to fight with their primitive weapons, spears, bone knives, and long, curved swords. The women of the tribe were skilled in combat, their movements swift and precise, honed through years of experience. Jack was not used to such raw, close combat. His training had been in strategy, in leading battles with technology and firepower. But here, on this alien world, there were no advanced weapons, only the strength of the body and the sharpness of the mind. At first, the HFY were skeptical. They watched Jack closely, waiting for him to fail. His body wasn't built for their way of fighting, and his lack of experience with their tools made him clumsy. He was often left bruised and sore, nursing wounds that barely healed before the next round of training began. But Jack didn't give up. He couldn't afford to. His mind was sharp, and he knew he had to learn quickly if he was to survive. He watched the warriors carefully, learning from their movements, their tactics. Slowly, his body began to adapt to the harsh environment. He gained strength, and his skills with the weapons improved. He even managed to hold his own in a few of the sparring matches. One day, during a training exercise, Taveri, one of the younger HFY warriors, challenged him to a duel. Taveri was fast and fierce, with long, dark hair that cascaded down her back. She was known for her speed, and most of the other HFY were confident she would easily defeat Jack. But Jack had something they didn't expect: determination. He wasn't as fast as Taveri, but he was resourceful. When the fight began, Taveri rushed toward him with a swift, calculated strike. Jack ducked, barely avoiding the blade. His heart raced, but he stayed focused. Instead of relying solely on his strength, he used his mind to predict her next move. Taveri attacked again, this time with a series of fast, high strikes. Jack sidestepped, grabbed a nearby vine, and used it to swing around her, catching her off guard. She stumbled, and Jack seized the opportunity to disarm her. The crowd of watching HFY gasped in surprise. Taveri quickly recovered, but Jack's quick thinking had earned her respect. "You are not like the others," Taveri said, breathing heavily but with a smile. "You learn quickly." Jack gave her a small smile. "I don't have much of a choice." From that moment on, things began to change. The HFY began to see Jack in a new light. He was no longer the weak, helpless outsider they had first thought him to be. He had shown them that humans could be just as strong, just as skilled, maybe even stronger in some ways. Matriarch HFY noticed this shift. She watched Jack closely, and though she never admitted it, Jack could tell she was starting to trust him. One evening, after a long day of training, Jack sat by a fire near the center of the village. The sky above was dotted with stars, far more than Jack had ever seen on Earth. It was a breathtaking sight, and for a moment he allowed himself to forget about the dangers of this world. Taveri approached him, sitting beside him by the fire. "You've changed the way we fight," she said quietly. "I've never seen anyone think like you." Jack looked at her, surprised by her words. "I've just been trying to survive." Taveri nodded. "The tribe needs new ideas. Siva, she's strong, but sometimes she's too stubborn. She doesn't see that we need to adapt, not just fight." Jack felt a pang of sympathy for Taveri. She was young, and her words revealed a sense of frustration that had been building for some time. The Xilari were fierce warriors, but their way of life was old. It had been forged in constant battle, and they had never known any other way. "I think you're right," Jack said, his voice thoughtful. "I can't change everything, but if I can help you change the way you fight, maybe we can all survive longer." Taveri looked at him with a mix of hope and doubt. "You're not like the others," she said again. "You make us think." Jack smiled slightly. "I don't just want to survive. I want to help you all survive, too." And so the training continued, but it wasn't just about physical strength anymore. Jack began to teach the Xilari new tactics, new strategies that combined their traditional strength with his own human knowledge. They trained harder, not just as individuals, but as a team. They began to learn the value of strategy, patience, and precision. It wasn't long before Jack became more than just an outsider. He was becoming a part of the tribe. And for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could help them change the future of this strange, dangerous world. The days passed quickly for Jack, and with each passing day, he grew stronger. The Xilari were no longer just a group of warriors to him. They were becoming something more, a team, a family. But the shadow of war loomed over them, and it was only a matter of time before it would reach their doorstep. Matriarch Siva had been gathering her warriors, preparing them for a conflict that had been brewing for years. The Katheri, a brutal, reptilian species from the nearby mountains, had been raiding Xilari settlements for months. Their attacks were savage, their numbers overwhelming. The Xilari had fought back, but the Katheri were relentless. Jack could see the worry in Siva's eyes. The tribe had been weakened by constant battles, and although they were skilled warriors, they lacked the unity that Jack had begun to teach them. He had given them strategies and tactics, but their numbers were still too small. They needed more allies, more fighters. One evening, after a long training session, Jack and Taveri sat on the edge of the village, looking out toward the distant mountains. The sun had just begun to set, casting a warm, golden light over the jungle. It was a beautiful sight, one that made Jack forget, for just a moment, the danger that was closing in on them. "I can feel it," Taveri said quietly, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. "The Katheri are coming. They will not stop until they have taken everything." Jack nodded. He had heard the stories. The Katheri were vicious, ruthless in their pursuit of power. They had already destroyed several Xilari villages, and now they were targeting the heart of the tribe. The Xilari stronghold, a towering city in the trees, was their next target. If the Katheri succeeded in taking it, the Xilari would be lost. Jack turned to Taveri. "We can't wait for them to come to us. We have to take the fight to them." Taveri looked at him, her eyes narrowing in thought. "You want us to attack first?" Jack's eyes burned with determination. "Yes. We'll use the strategies I've taught you. We know the jungle better than they do. We can set traps, ambush them, force them into positions where they can't win." Taveri was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally, she spoke. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance." Jack clenched his fists. "I'm not going to let them take this place. I won't let the Xilari die. Not while I'm here." Over the next few days, Jack worked with the warriors to prepare for the attack. They trained harder than ever before, practicing new tactics and honing their skills. They worked together as a team, setting up traps and gathering supplies. Jack's knowledge of tactics and guerrilla warfare became the foundation for their plan. The Xilari were strong, but with Jack's guidance, they would become deadly. As the days passed, the tension in the village grew. The warriors were anxious, their nerves frayed by the impending battle. Even matriarch Siva seemed troubled. She had always led the tribe with strength and conviction, but now Jack could see the weight of leadership on her shoulders. One night, as the warriors gathered around a fire, Jack stood before them, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "Tomorrow, we will fight. We will take the battle to the Katheri. They have been attacking us for too long, and we will no longer run. We will defend our land, our people, and our future." The warriors nodded in agreement, their eyes burning with a shared resolve. For the first time, Jack could feel it. The tribe was united. The night before the battle, Jack sat by the fire, lost in thought. He knew the risks. The Katheri were strong, and they had more soldiers than the Xilari. But Jack believed in the Xilari. He had seen their strength, their ability to fight with precision and honor. They were ready. Taveri joined him by the fire. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. Jack looked up at her, his face grim but resolute. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, we might not survive the next attack." Taveri sat beside him, her hand resting on her sword. "Then we fight, together." The next morning, the Xilari warriors gathered at the edge of the jungle, their weapons ready. Jack stood at the front, leading them into the unknown. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew this was the only way. They moved silently through the jungle, setting up their traps along the way. The Katheri would be coming soon. When they did, the Xilari would be ready. Jack had no illusions about the dangers ahead. This battle would be brutal. There would be losses, but he was determined to give the Xilari a chance to fight, to survive. As they neared the Katheri stronghold, the tension in the air grew thick. Jack felt a surge of adrenaline as he signaled for the warriors to take their positions. The time had come. The Katheri were out there, somewhere in the jungle, waiting for them. The jungle was eerily quiet as the Xilari warriors crouched in position. Jack's heart raced in his chest. The air was thick with anticipation, the quiet before the storm. He glanced at Taveri, who gave him a small, reassuring nod. She had proven herself to be a fierce warrior, and today they would fight side by side. Jack's mind raced as he thought through the strategy once more. The Katheri would be coming, and the Xilari had set up a series of traps in the dense jungle. If all went according to plan, the Katheri would be drawn into their ambushes. Jack had taught the Xilari how to use the jungle to their advantage, hiding in plain sight, moving silently among the trees. For a moment, Jack let himself think of Earth, of the life he had left behind. The peace, the technology, the comfort. But that world felt distant now, like a dream fading in the light of this new reality. Here, in this strange, alien jungle, survival was everything. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the distant sounds of marching. The Katheri were coming. Jack held his breath, motioning for the warriors to stay still. They had to wait for the perfect moment. He could hear the heavy steps of the Katheri soldiers, their reptilian feet crunching the foliage as they advanced. The air was thick with tension as Jack and the Xilari held their positions. Then the signal came, a low whistle from Taveri. Jack nodded and silently moved to his position. The time had come. The first wave of Katheri stumbled into the carefully set traps. The Xilari had dug pits in the ground, covered by branches and leaves. As the Katheri stepped into them, they fell, screaming in surprise. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the battle began. The Katheri were large, with thick, scaled bodies and sharp claws. They were fierce warriors, used to dominating their enemies with brute strength. But they were not prepared for the guerrilla tactics that the Xilari had learned. Jack and Taveri moved swiftly through the jungle, attacking from the shadows. They darted in and out of cover, striking when the Katheri least expected it. Jack was amazed at how well the Xilari had adapted to his strategies. They were quick and precise, taking down Katheri one by one. But the Catheri were not weak. They fought back with terrifying force. Jack saw one of the Xilari warriors, a young woman named Lyra, strike a Catheri soldier down only to be knocked aside by another. The impact sent her crashing into the ground, but she quickly rolled to her feet, drawing her knife. The Catheri was stronger, but Lyra fought with a fire that made her dangerous. She lunged forward, her blade slashing across the Catheri's scales, causing it to roar in pain. Jack's eyes darted around as more Catheri emerged from the shadows, their numbers overwhelming. They were closing in, and for a moment, it felt as though the Xilari were outmatched. The jungle was alive with the sounds of combat, swords clashing, screams echoing through the trees. Jack gritted his teeth. He couldn't let them lose. Not now. He saw Taveri, her sword raised high as she cut down another Catheri soldier. She was fast, moving like a shadow through the underbrush. Jack knew she was a key player in this battle. He signaled to her, motioning for her to follow him. Together, they could lead the Xilari to victory. As they fought their way through the jungle, Jack spotted Matriarch Siva in the distance, fighting at the heart of the battle. The leader of the Xilari was a force to be reckoned with, her every move calculated and powerful. She was a symbol of strength, and Jack knew that her presence was a rallying cry for the Xilari warriors. But even Siva could not fight alone. Jack felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the tribe, for their survival. He had brought them hope, but now it was up to them to defend their land. Just as Jack was about to charge into the fray, a Catheri warrior lunged at him, its claws outstretched. The creature was fast, but Jack was quicker. He dodged to the side, grabbing a nearby spear and thrusting it forward. The spear pierced the Catheri's side, causing it to howl in pain and stumble back. Jack quickly pulled the spear free, ready for the next strike. The battle raged on, with the Xilari warriors fighting fiercely. But the Catheri were relentless, pushing back harder than Jack had anticipated. He could see the exhaustion on the faces of the Xilari, the sweat and blood mixing in the heat of the battle. They were strong, but they were not invincible. Then, just as Jack thought the tide was turning against them, the sound of reinforcements reached his ears. More Xilari warriors emerged from the jungle, launching a new wave of attacks. The Catheri were being surrounded. Matriarch Siva's voice rang out over the battlefield, rallying her warriors. "We fight for the future of the Xilari. We fight for survival." The words seemed to fill the air, lifting the spirits of the Xilari warriors. They pushed back with renewed strength, driving the Catheri into retreat. Jack felt a surge of relief, but the fight was far from over. He knew that victory was not guaranteed, but for the first time, the Catheri were on the defensive. The Xilari had proven their strength, their unity. As the last Catheri soldier retreated into the jungle, Jack stood among the warriors, breathing heavily. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Catheri would return, and when they did, the Xilari would be ready. Jack looked around at the faces of the warriors. They had fought with everything they had, and now they had a chance to live. The Xilari had found their strength, and so had he. The jungle was still, as though it too had taken a breath after the chaos of the battle. The sound of distant birds and the rustling of leaves filled the air, but the tension from the fight still hung heavily around the Xilari warriors. They had won the battle, but the war was not over. Jack could feel it in the pit of his stomach. The Catheri would not stay down for long. Jack stood by a large fire, watching the flickering flames as the warriors around him tended to the wounded. His body ached from the fight, but he couldn't afford to rest. There was still work to be done. The Xilari needed to rebuild, and they needed to prepare for whatever the Catheri might throw at them next. Taveri approached, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, but her eyes shone with a sense of pride. "We did it," she said quietly, almost to herself. "We actually did it." Jack nodded, but his mind was focused on the future. "We won this time," he said, his voice low, "but we can't let our guard down. The Cathari will come again, and we need to be ready." Tavari's expression grew serious. She knew Jack was right. The Xilari had fought bravely, but they were still outnumbered. They needed more allies, more strength. But where would they find it? "I know," Tavari said, "but today we proved that we can stand against them. We're stronger than we were before." Jack smiled slightly. "That's true. We're not just surviving anymore. We're fighting back. And we'll keep fighting until the Cathari are defeated." As the night wore on, the camp settled into a quieter rhythm. The wounded were tended to, the dead mourned, and the warriors shared stories of the battle. Jack sat alone near the fire, lost in his thoughts. He had been a soldier before, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle for territory or power. It was a fight for survival. He thought about the tribe. The Xilari had welcomed him into their world, had made him one of their own. He couldn't imagine abandoning them now, not when they needed him the most. The Cathari were still out there, and Jack knew that he had to do everything he could to ensure the Xilari's future. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. "You've done more for us than anyone else ever could." It was matriarch Siva. She stood before him, her eyes tired but full of respect. Her strength had carried the tribe through the darkest of times, but now Jack could see a change in her. She had trusted him, and that trust had brought them victory. Jack stood and faced her, nodding respectfully. "I only did what needed to be done. You and your people fought with everything you had. It was you who led them into battle, not me." Siva's lips curled into a slight smile. "You taught us how to fight, how to think differently. You've given us the chance to win, Jack. For that, we are forever grateful." Jack's heart swelled with pride. He had been afraid when he first arrived on the alien world, unsure if he could ever make a difference. But now he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. The Xilari were a tribe of warriors, yes, but they were also a family, and he was honored to be a part of that family. "We still have a long way to go," Jack said. "The Cathari won't stop just because we beat them once." Siva's gaze hardened, her voice resolute. "We know, but now we stand together, and together we will defeat them." Jack nodded. The strength in her words was undeniable. The Xilari had a fire in them that was hard to match. They had survived countless battles, and they would survive this war as well. As the night drew to a close, Jack couldn't help but think about the future. The Cathari were only one threat in a world full of dangers. There were countless other tribes, unknown creatures, and challenges waiting for the Xilari and himself. But for the first time, Jack felt hopeful. The Xilari had something that no other tribe had. They had unity. They had heart. Jack was starting to realize that this world, this strange alien planet, was more than just a place he had stumbled into. It was home now. He had a responsibility to protect it, to help the Xilari build a future where they could live free from fear. "We've made a good start," Jack murmured to himself, staring into the fire. "But this is just the beginning." Tavari returned to his side, her face filled with determination. "We'll fight together. We'll keep going until the Cathari are gone. And then, who knows? Maybe we'll find peace." Jack met her gaze and smiled. Maybe. But for now, peace was a distant dream. The war was not over, and Jack knew that the next battle would come sooner than they expected. The Cathari were not the only threat they would face. But as he looked around at the faces of the warriors, he knew one thing for sure. They were not alone. They had each other. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun was rising over the jungle, casting a soft golden light through the trees. The air was cooler than usual, and the jungle seemed peaceful, almost as if it were recovering from the chaos of the past few days. But Jack knew better. The battle was not over, and the Xilari had to remain vigilant. It had been a few days since the Cathari had been driven back, and in that time, the Xilari had begun rebuilding. The village was still standing, but the scars of war were clear. The trees around the stronghold were scared from the battle, and the ground was torn with the marks of combat. Jack stood near the edge of the village, looking out over the jungle. His thoughts were heavy. The HFY had fought bravely, but there was so much more to do. The HFY would return, and this time they would be stronger, more prepared. Jack knew they needed to be ready, but the question lingered in his mind. How could they prepare for something they didn't fully understand? He wasn't the only one thinking about the future. Taveri approached him, her face a mix of determination and worry. She had been working tirelessly alongside the other warriors to reinforce the village defenses, but even she knew that there was only so much they could do with the resources they had. "We've done all we can, Jack," Taveri said quietly. "The traps are set, the warriors are ready, but there's still something missing. We need more fighters, more strength." Jack nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. The HFY had proven they were skilled, but they couldn't fight the HFY alone forever. "We need allies," Jack said. "Other tribes. We need to unite the surrounding clans." Taveri's brow furrowed in thought. "But the other tribes don't trust us. They see us as outsiders, as weak." "We can change that," Jack replied, his voice filled with confidence. "We've shown the HFY that we can fight back. If we can prove to the other tribes that we're strong, we might stand a chance." Taveri hesitated. "It won't be easy." "I know," Jack said. "But we don't have a choice. If we're going to defeat the HFY, we need to unite the tribes. Together, we can stand against them." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, watching as the warriors worked in the distance. The HFY were rebuilding their stronghold, reinforcing the defenses, and preparing for the next wave of attack. It was clear that the tribe was strong, but Jack knew they needed more. The HFY were just one threat in a world full of dangers. If the HFY were to survive, they needed to grow, to expand their alliances. Later that day, Jack gathered the leaders of the HFY tribe in the central meeting area. Matriarch Siva, Taveri, and several of the senior warriors sat around a large stone table, their faces serious as they discussed their next steps. Jack stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding. "We've proven we can fight," Jack began, looking around the room at the gathered leaders. "But we can't do this alone. We need to reach out to the other tribes. We need their support." Matriarch Siva met his gaze, her eyes filled with wisdom and wariness. "The other tribes are distrustful. They've seen the HFY, but they haven't seen what we're capable of. They won't join us without proof." Jack nodded. "Then we'll give them proof. We'll send a message. We'll show them that the HFY are not just survivors, we're warriors, and together, we'll defeat the HFY." The leaders exchanged glances, considering Jack's words. It was a bold plan, but it was the only option they had. The HFY would return, and when they did, the HFY had to be ready. After a long silence, Siva spoke. "We will send emissaries to the other tribes. We will show them our strength. If they choose to stand with us, we will have allies. If not, we will fight alone. But we will fight." Jack felt a surge of hope. The HFY were strong, and now they were beginning to unite with other tribes. They were taking their first steps toward becoming something more, something greater than just a tribe fighting for survival. They were becoming a force that could change the world. As the days passed, Jack and the HFY emissaries traveled to the neighboring tribes, seeking alliances and offering their support. It was difficult, as many of the tribes were hesitant to trust outsiders, especially after years of conflict. But Jack's words, his passion, and the success of the HFY in battle began to turn the tide. Slowly, the tribes began to listen, and a few agreed to join the fight against the HFY. But Jack knew it wouldn't be enough. There were still many tribes who refused to join them, who would rather face the HFY alone than risk working with others. Jack could only hope that, in time, they would see the wisdom of unity. The Cathari were not just a threat to the Xilari. They were a threat to all tribes. If they didn't stand together, they would fall alone. Jack returned to the Xilari stronghold with news of the alliances they had formed. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The warriors were eager to see the results, and Matriarch Xiva was pleased, though she knew there was still much work to be done. The Cathari will not stop until they have everything, Jack said to Xiva as they stood together overlooking the jungle. But together, we can defeat them. Together, we can build a future. Xiva nodded, her eyes filled with the fire of leadership. Together, we will fight. As the sun set behind them, Jack felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and dangers. But the Xilari had come a long way, and now they were united. With strength, courage, and determination, they would face the future together.